After just 6 months, Gary Patterson is out of the Baylor football staff. This is an emergency Locked On Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, welcome into an emergency Locked On Baylor on this Friday evening. Thank you for making it your first listen today and every day, and sometimes your second, third, and fourth. I am your host, Cam Stewart of ESPN Central Texas and The Cam Show on Rogue Media Sports Network. And the big news of the day, right before I actually went on the air on the radio, Gary Patterson and Baylor have decided to part ways. This comes just 6 months after Patterson was introduced to the staff as a consultant. That, again, like the beginning of February, and now just in the first few days of fall camp, now the two have gone their separate ways. And we actually had Gary Patterson on the Matt Mosley Show on ESPN Central Texas just moments after, about a half hour after this news dropped, and he kind of explained his side of the story. And I think it kind of opened some things up about his job that we might not have known before. But basically what Gary said was, I kind of did what I came to do. More or less is what he said. And then to some degree, he didn't want to be a distraction, which is something we have heard from day one. We heard that sentiment when he was at Texas as well, is that he doesn't want this to be the Gary Patterson show. He doesn't want to outshine any of the actual coaches on the staff. And I think that's something that comes with the respect of being a head coach for so long. But this certainly comes as shocking news. I don't know that it makes or breaks Baylor's season, but it's one that is very surprising that, he didn't even make it to the season, didn't even make it to a game. Basically the entirety of the offseason, though, he was there and helping Baylor. And I think one of the things that he clarified was his role was a consultant. It was not an analyst. So he was trying to help with a lot of the infrastructure of things, mainly things like, NIL, recruiting, transfer portal, things like that. We worked a lot with Javon Overshone, who is the director of football operations. So very hand in hand with that kind of infrastructure things and making sure things are in place as a program to get back to being successful. But Patterson said no ill will with Dave Aranda. He says he really liked working with Dave. He said that Gary is a better coach for having done it. And that he got to see a little bit of a different side of Baylor other than the ones he was obviously not too keen on a decade ago, and that Baylor got to see another side of Gary Patterson for a little bit. And also said he's really going to miss the players. He had certainly made a connection with a lot of these players, it sounds like, over the short period that he was here. And certainly I think that would lend us to believe that he is not done with coaching. That's something we're going to talk about a little bit on Locked On Baylor next week, what that could mean for Baylor as well as for Gary Patterson. He had also said that he is not working for anyone else this year, that he is taking calls from Baylor. He's a phone call away for Baylor, for Dave Aranda. And one interesting story that I do think is great, and it will be something that we'll also talk about a little bit more next week, is we kind of asked him about that awkwardness, right, of being a TCU legend, but also now coaching for Baylor. And he said, yeah, and that was part of the interview process. The people at Baylor asked me that, you're college football Hall of Famer, you have this great legacy at TCU. Why come here? Why do you have interest? We know why we have interest. Why do you have interest? And he said, because I like your coach. And that was a big takeaway for me, is Gary really wanting to help Dave Aranda. We know his feelings about Art Briles, and that was what made for a great rivalry 10 years ago. But that he was able to say, I think this is a great coach. And without saying this, Gary did not say this, but probably hasn't figured it all out yet to be a head coach. Gary could certainly be a help to him, and I hope that he was. But this was very surprising news. 6 months. It was always kind of cloudy as to what his role was. And I think most of us, myself included, really thought analyst rather than consultant, even though he was announced as a senior strategic consultant. I wasn't thinking of him as, like Ben Wyatt in Parks and Rec to come in with Rob Lowe and save the day for the city of Pawnee, Indiana, in this case being Baylor football. I didn't think it was going to be like that, and that's more of what he laid out. But we were wondering, is he gonna be on the sideline? Are we gonna see him in Baylor gear, which I don't think we ever really saw him in? Or is he gonna be drawing up the game plans for the next week? Is he going to be working with a certain position group? That was all kind of vague, and come to find out that it really wasn't necessarily any of those things. He was working with players, sure, and obviously working very closely with Dave Aranda, but it really didn't become any of that. So victory lap for the TCU people, I guess. I don't know. I don't know how I would feel about it if I was a TCU fan. I mean, he still did accept the job, and wanted to help turn Baylor around, which is still a rival of TCU and is still in the conference that TCU is in. So I think I find that kind of interesting. But I for one was really excited about having Gary Patterson on the staff. I said it at the time when he was hired. I didn't think there was anything negative. Like, the people on the staff don't care about what Gary Patterson said 10 years ago about Baylor. Only some of us in the stands care about that. And not to say that doesn't mean anything, a fan's perspective, but it's tough for a lot of us to be calling for the coach's job and saying that the coach isn't getting it done and hoping for changes on the staff. And then when you bring in the brightest defensive mind, arguably of the last 25 years in college football, to say, "Oh, well, we don't want him." That you can't be like that. I just, if Lane Kiffin went and got Nick Saban as a consultant, I don't think the Ole Miss people would be like, "Oh no, he sucked again. We hated him for all these years." No, he's the best. Gary Patterson is one of the best college football coaches of my lifetime, like top 4 or 5. And I was excited to have him imparting wisdom on this Baylor staff, and it sounds like he still will be from a distance. I don't know. With him not being on the staff officially, I don't know if Dave's going to be calling him every Saturday night to recap the game they just had and what he can work on. I don't think so. But the Gary Patterson era is over at Baylor. We hardly knew ye. We did. It just would have been great. It would have been great to see him there at that TCU game wearing Baylor stuff just for one time. Look, TCU fans, you were always going to get the best Gary Patterson. You were going to get the 21 years, the great program turnaround. What we wanted was just like a picture of him in the Baylor gear, and maybe spurning Sonny Dykes for a handshake. I don't know. Is that too much to ask for? Maybe it was. It has been a very positive summer for Baylor football. I don't think this changes that. It does. Certainly, it's not as positive as everything else has been, but I think there is an impact that Gary Patterson has on this season. I don't know that we'll ever know what it is unless Dave Aranda tells us. And it's not going to be immediately like, oh, because the defense is better. Dave Aranda is a pretty good defensive coach too. So I don't know that it's going to be readily apparent how he has helped, but I think this Gary Patterson experience, albeit very short, can only help Baylor, and only help Dave Aranda, and only help those players that were down there getting his coaching during the spring. He was very active, very hands-on during the spring, from everyone at the spring finale saying, he was Coach P. So I hope there's a good tribute video. I think that would be great for Baylor. Week 1 tribute video. Gary Patterson, his great time as a Bear. But let me know what you guys think about this quick episode today. Drop that down in the comments below on YouTube or tweet at us at Locked On Baylor. Just what you think of this. Were you on board with Gary Patterson in the first place? What questions do you still have after this? Like I mentioned, we're going to kind of dive into some of the things he said and some of the dynamics I think that could come out of this or had come out of this. We're going to talk about that early next week. But let me know what you think about this and what questions you still have over the Gary Patterson era at Baylor. Be sure to like and subscribe. Get involved down in the comments below. Get involved with the show on Twitter. We are here on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts today and every day. And thank you for making it your first listen every day. We'll be back on Monday. This is Locked On Baylor.